The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the marble floor of Belmont's, the kind of restaurant where a single appetizer cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Maya Richardson's hands trembled slightly as she balanced the silver tray, not from the weight of the $300 bottle of wine, but from the electric tension crackling through the private dining room. Harrison Blackwood sat at the head of the mahogany table, his custom Italian suit catching the light as he gestured dismissively at the gathered executives, his voice cutting through their nervous laughter like a blade through silk. "Incompetence," he said, swirling his wine glass with practiced precision, "is a disease that spreads through organizations like cancer. One weak link and suddenly the entire chain collapses." His eyes, cold and calculating as winter's steel, swept across the faces of his subordinates. Maya had served him dozens of times over the past 18 months, and she'd learned to read the micro-expressions that preceded his volcanic temper. The slight narrowing of his left eye, the way his index finger would tap exactly 3 times against the table before he struck. Tonight was different. Tonight there was something almost gleeful in his cruelty. "Take our waitstaff, for example," Harrison continued, and Maya felt her stomach drop even before his gaze found her. "They parade around here pretending they belong in these spaces, wearing their little uniforms like armor. But strip away the costume, and what do you have? People who couldn't achieve anything meaningful in their lives, reduced to carrying plates for those who actually matter." The room fell silent. Even the background jazz seemed to fade. Maya's colleague, Samuel, an elderly man who'd worked at Belmont's for 30 years and treated every server like his own grandchild, stood frozen by the service door. His weathered hands gripped his serving cloths so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Beside him, Lucia, barely 21 and supporting her sick mother, had tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Maya set down the wine bottle with deliberate care, her movements slow and controlled. The antique locket around her neck, her grandmother's, the only valuable thing she owned, caught the light as she straightened. That locket had seen her through 16-hour shifts, through college classes squeezed between doubles, through the humiliation of customers who saw her as furniture rather than human. Her grandmother had worn it while scrubbing floors in this very neighborhood 60 years ago, when the buildings were younger, but the attitudes were much the same. "Mr. Blackwood," Maya said, her voice steady despite the hurricane in her chest, "your dinner will be out momentarily. The chef has prepared the Wagyu exactly to your specifications, seared for 90 seconds per side, internal temperature of exactly 120 degrees. Harrison's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Look at this," he announced to his table. "She memorizes temperatures like their stock prices. Tell me, Maya, that is your name, isn't it? Do you practice these little speeches in the mirror? Do you go home to your studio apartment and pretend that knowing how I like my steak makes you something more than what you are?" The executives around the table shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer Wu, Blackwood Industries' CFO, stared into her wine glass as if it held the secrets of the universe. Marcus Rodriguez, the head of acquisitions, cleared his throat but said nothing. They all knew better than to interrupt Harrison when he was in one of his moods. They'd all seen what happened to those who tried to show compassion or suggest restraint. They became his next targets. Maya had grown up in the Riverside district, just 4 miles from here, but a world away in every sense that mattered. The apartment building where she'd spent her childhood had walls so thin you could hear every argument, every celebration, every moment of despair from 3 units away. Her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat after her father's construction accident left him unable to work. Maya had started helping at 14, tutoring kids in the neighborhood for $5 an hour, saving every penny for college textbooks she'd buy used and sell back for a fraction of the price. Belmont's had been supposed to be temporary, just a way to pay for her MBA, to finally climb out of the cycle that had trapped her family for generations. She was 3 credits away from graduation, 3 credits from freedom. But those credits cost money, and money meant serving people like Harrison Blackwood with a smile while they stripped away pieces of her dignity like layers of paint from an old wall. "I'm simply doing my job, Mr. Blackwood," Maya replied, meeting his gaze directly. It was a calculated risk. Looking him in the eye could be seen as either confidence or defiance, and with Harrison, the interpretation could change based on his mood, the wine, or the alignment of the stars. "Your job?" he repeated, rolling the words around his mouth like he was tasting them. "Your job is to be invisible, to appear when needed and disappear when not. Your job is to understand that in the ecosystem of this city, you're not even the bottom of the food chain. You're the algae that the bottom feeders consume." Samuel stepped forward, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "Mr. Blackwood, I think—" "You think?" Harrison's head snapped toward the older man. "That's rich. Tell me, Samuel, in your, 30 years of carrying plates, what earth-shattering thoughts have crossed your mind? What innovations have you brought to the world? What legacy will you leave behind besides perfectly folded napkins?" Maya watched Samuel's face crumble, this proud man who'd sent 3 kids to college on a waiter's salary, who volunteered at the community center, teaching young people proper etiquette and job interview skills, who'd never missed a day of work despite arthritis that made every movement painful. The private dining room of Belmont's had hosted presidents and prime ministers, had been the site of billion-dollar deals and society weddings. The walls were covered in original oil paintings, each worth more than most people's homes. The carpet beneath their feet had been imported from Turkey, hand-woven by artisans whose families had been perfecting their craft for centuries. And yet, in this moment, all that opulence felt like a prison, a gilded cage where human dignity came to die. Harrison reached for his wine, and that's when it happened. His movement was too quick, too careless, and the glass tipped. $300 of Chateau Margaux cascaded across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like blood across snow. A few drops splashed onto his suit jacket, leaving dark stains against the pearl gray fabric. The room held its breath. Harrison's face transformed, shifting from casual cruelty to genuine rage. "You incompetent!" He stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. "Do you have any idea what this suit costs? It's worth more than you make in 6 months." Maya hadn't been anywhere near him when the wine spilled, but that didn't matter. In Harrison's world, blame was a weapon to be wielded against whoever was convenient, whoever was powerless to fight back. She grabbed a cloth and moved toward the table, but he raised his hand, stopping her. "Don't you dare touch me. You've done enough damage. This entire meal, this entire evening has been a disaster from the moment you walked in here with your fake smile and your pathetic attempted dignity." He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "I'm calling your manager. You're done here. And when I'm finished, you won't be able to get a job cleaning toilets in this city." Lucia gasped. Samuel started forward again, but Maya caught his arm, shaking her head slightly. She knew what this meant. Belmont's wouldn't just fire her. Harrison's influence extended throughout the hospitality industry in the city. He sat on boards, owned shares in restaurant groups, had connections that could destroy a career with a single phone call. "The meal," Harrison continued, his voice now ice-cold and controlled, "is ruined. The wine is wasted, my suit is destroyed, and you want me to pay for this catastrophe?" He laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "I'm not paying a cent. In fact, this establishment should be paying me for the trauma of having to endure this level of incompetence." Jennifer Wu finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Harrison, perhaps what, Jennifer?" He rounded on her. "Perhaps I should reward mediocrity? Perhaps I should pretend that standards don't matter? This is exactly the kind of thinking that's made you soft, that's made this entire company soft. We accept less than perfection, and soon we're accepting failure." Maya stood perfectly still, her mind racing. The bill for tonight's dinner would be over $3,000. If Harrison refused to pay, the restaurant's policy was clear. The server responsible for the table would have to cover it. $3,000. That was 2 months' rent. That was the registration for her final semester. That was the difference between finishing her degree and giving up, between breaking the cycle and perpetuating it. But it was more than the money. It was the principle,
the casual destruction of lives that Harrison engaged in like it was a sport. She thought of every server who'd been fired because a customer was having a bad day, every janitor treated like they were invisible, every human being reduced to their economic function and found wanting. "Mr. Blackwood," Maya said, and her voice carried something new. Not defiance exactly, but a kind of quiet certainty. "The wine spilled because you knocked it over. We have security cameras that will show exactly what happened. You can refuse to pay if you'd like, but that would be theft of services, and I'm fairly certain that someone in your position wouldn't want that kind of publicity." The silence that followed was deafening. The executives around the table looked like they were witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Harrison's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a purple that looked genuinely concerning from a medical perspective. "Are you threatening me?" he asked, each word deliberate and dangerous. "I'm stating facts, just as you were earlier when you explained the importance of accountability in organizations." Harrison pulled out his wallet and threw a handful of bills on the wine-soaked table. Not enough to cover the meal, maybe half. "There's your accountability, and here's another fact for you. By tomorrow morning, you won't just be unemployed. I'll make sure everyone in this industry knows your name, and not in a good way. You'll be radioactive. No restaurant, no bar, no food truck in this city will hire you." He stormed out, his executives scrambling to follow, leaving Maya standing in the ruins of the evening. Samuel's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. Lucia was crying openly now. The money on the table would barely cover the wine, let alone the food that was probably getting cold in the kitchen. Maya reached up and touched her grandmother's locket, feeling the worn edges that had been smoothed by decades of similar gestures in moments of crisis. Inside was a tiny photo of her grandmother as a young woman, standing in front of the very first business she'd cleaned, wearing her uniform with a pride that transcended the menial nature of the work. On the back, in handwriting so small Maya needed a magnifying glass to read it, were the words, "Dignity is not given, it is claimed." She began clearing the table, her movements automatic, practiced. Tomorrow she would be unemployed. Tomorrow her career in hospitality would be over. Tomorrow she would have to figure out how to pay for her final semester, how to keep her apartment, how to survive. But tonight she had looked Harrison Blackwood in the eye and hadn't flinched. Tonight she had refused to be invisible. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that 3 hours ago something extraordinary had happened in a boardroom 40 stories above the city. Something that would make tomorrow very different than what Harrison Blackwood expected. Maya's alarm went off at 4:47 a.m., the same time it had rung every day for the past 18 months. The sound cut through the thin walls of her studio apartment like a rusty blade, and she could hear her neighbor's baby start crying in response. She lay still for exactly 3 minutes, a ritual she'd developed to center herself before facing another day, staring at the water stain on her ceiling that looked like a constellation if she squinted right. The apartment was 400 square feet of carefully managed chaos. Her bed doubled as a couch during the day, pushed against the wall to create space for the small desk where she studied. The desk itself was a masterpiece of organization born from necessity. Textbooks stacked by subject and deadline, color-coded sticky notes covering every available surface with formulas, theories, and motivational quotes she'd collected over the years. Her laptop, a refurbished model she'd bought from a pawn shop and restored for self, sat closed beside a cup of pens she'd accumulated from various hotels where she'd never stayed but had catered events. The kitchen was more of a suggestion than an actual room. A hot plate, a mini fridge that hummed like it was constantly clearing its throat, and a sink that required a specific jiggling of the handle to stop dripping. But Maya had made it beautiful in her own way. She'd strung fairy lights across the ceiling, their soft glow making the dingy walls look almost romantic in the pre-dawn darkness. Plants lined the windowsill, herbs mostly, grown from seeds because buying them pre-grown was a luxury she couldn't afford. The basil was thriving, the rosemary struggling, and the mint had taken over its pot with an ambition Maya recognized and admired. She moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency. Shower, exactly 5 minutes to conserve hot water. Dress, the same black pants and white shirt she'd worn yesterday, cleaned and pressed with an iron she'd found at a garage sale. Coffee, instant, with a splash of milk that was 2 days past its sell-by date but still smelled fine. While the coffee cooled, she opened her laptop and checked her emails. 23 new messages. Her heart sunk as she read through them. The first was from Roberto, Belmont's manager. "Maya, I'm sorry, but after last night's incident with Mr. Blackwood, we have to let you go. Your final check will be mailed to you. Please return your uniform by end of week." The next 5 were from other restaurants she'd applied for backup positions over the months, all variations on the same theme. "We've decided to go in a different direction. The position has been filled. We don't feel you'd be a good fit for our establishment." Harrison had worked fast. But it was the 7th email that made her stomach twist into knots. From the university registrar, "Ms. Richardson, this is a reminder that your tuition payment for the final semester is due in 5 days. Failure to submit payment will result in automatic withdrawal from your courses." She closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, letting the weight of it settle on her shoulders. 3 credits. She was 3 credits away from her MBA, from the degree that was supposed to change everything. She'd already completed her thesis on sustainable business practices in the service industry, had already defended it to a panel of professors who'd called it innovative and thoroughly researched. All that stood between her and graduation was international finance, strategic management, and an elective she'd chosen on social entrepreneurship. She thought about calling her mother, but it was too early. And besides, what would she say? That she'd lost her job standing up to a customer? Her mother would understand, would be proud even, but she'd also worry, and she had enough to worry about with Dad's medical bills and her own health issues that she tried to hide, but Maya knew about anyway. Instead, Maya pulled out a notebook, not a fancy one, just a composition book from the dollar store, and began writing. It was a habit she'd developed in high school, when a guidance counselor had suggested it as a way to process her circumstances. She hated the condescension in that phrase, the implication that her life was something to be endured rather than lived, but the writing itself had become essential. Day 6847. Lost my job for having a spine. Might lose my future for the same reason. Grandma would say this is a test. I say it's Tuesday. She wrote about Harrison's face when she'd mentioned the security cameras, about Samuel's shaking hands, about Lucia's tears. She wrote about the weight of the tray and the weight of expectations, about the distance between who she was and who she was supposed to be, about the algebra of survival in a city that demanded everything and promised nothing. By 5:30, she was dressed and ready, though ready for what, she wasn't sure. Without a job to go to, her day stretched ahead like an empty highway. But Maya Richardson had never been good at sitting still. She grabbed her backpack, loaded with her textbooks, resume copies she'd printed at the library, and a water bottle she'd refill at public fountains throughout the day, and headed out. The city at dawn was a different creature than the one most people knew. The streets belonged to delivery drivers and dog walkers, to nurses ending night shifts and construction workers beginning day ones. Maya had always loved this liminal time, when the city felt honest, stripped of its pretenses. She walked the 6 blocks to the community center where she volunteered on Tuesday mornings, teaching basic computer skills to seniors. The center was housed in an old church that had been converted in the 80s, its stained glass windows now overlooking basketball courts instead of pews. Martha, the director, was already there, setting up chairs in the computer lab, a generous term for a room with 6 ancient PCs that Maya kept running through a combination of technical knowledge and sheer will. "You're early," Martha said, then looked closer at Maya's face. "What happened?" Maya told her, and Martha listened with the kind of attention that made you feel like your words mattered. When Maya finished, Martha was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, my daughter works in corporate placement, big firms, executive-level stuff. Maybe she could—" "Thanks," Maya interrupted gently, "but I don't think I'm executive placement material.
Wrong pedigree, wrong connections, wrong everything. Wrong nothing, Martha said firmly. But I understand. Just remember, sometimes the biggest opportunities come disguised as the worst disasters. The seniors began arriving at 7, and Maya lost herself in the familiar rhythm of teaching. Mr. Chen, who at 78 was determined to master email so he could talk to his grandchildren in Beijing. Mrs. Williams, who wanted to sell her jewelry on Etsy to supplement her Social Security. Jorge, who was writing his memoirs, one painstaking keystroke at a time. They treated her like she was doing them a favor, but the truth was they saved her as much as she helped them. In their stories of resilience, of starting over after loss, of adapting to a world that had changed beyond recognition from the one they'd known, Maya found inspiration. They'd survived wars and recessions, discrimination and disease, and they were still here, still learning, still growing. After the class, Maya took the subway downtown. She had a plan, or at least the skeleton of one. If Harrison had blacklisted her from traditional restaurants, maybe she could find work in places he wouldn't think to influence. Food trucks, catering companies that served community events rather than corporate functions. Small family-owned places in neighborhoods where Harrison Blackwood's name meant nothing. The first 3 places she tried wouldn't even take her resume. Word had already spread. The fourth, a small Dominican restaurant in Washington Heights, let her fill out an application, but she could see in the owner's eyes that he'd already decided against her. The fifth was a coffee shop near the university that primarily employed students. The manager, a young woman barely older than Maya, looked at the resume and whistled. MBA candidate? 18 months at Belmont's? References from... Wait, why did you leave Belmont's? Maya had prepared for this question. Disagreement with a customer that led to my termination. What kind of disagreement? The kind where I suggested he should pay for his meal. The manager laughed, then caught herself. Harrison Blackwood? Maya's silence was answer enough. Yeah, we got a call about you this morning, the manager said, sliding the resume back across the counter. I'm sorry, I'd hire you in a heartbeat, but we're part of a larger chain, and corporate made it clear, you're untouchable. Untouchable. The word followed Maya through the rest of the day as she made her way through the city. She stopped at the library to use their computers, applying for jobs online, each application feeling more futile than the last. She ate lunch in the park, a peanut butter sandwich she'd made that morning, watching office workers buy $15 salads from a truck that wouldn't hire her. By afternoon, exhaustion was setting in. Not physical, though her feet hurt from walking in shoes that needed replacing, but emotional. The weight of fighting, constantly fighting just to stay in place. She thought about her classmates in the MBA program, most of whom had never worked service, who talked about their struggles with unpaid internships at firms their fathers had connections to, who wore watches worth more than her annual rent. She wasn't bitter, exactly. Bitter implied surprise, and Maya had long ago stopped being surprised by inequality. But she was tired. Tired of being resilient. Tired of being strong. Tired of every setback being a learning opportunity or a character-building experience. Sometimes, she wanted to tell the universe, a setback could just be a setback. Sometimes it was okay to acknowledge that things were unfair without immediately pivoting to gratitude or growth. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lucia. Heard what happened. Some of us are meeting at Kelly's tonight, 8 p.m. Please come. Kelly's was a dive bar 2 blocks from Belmont's, where the service industry folks went to decompress after shifts. Maya hadn't been in months. Between work and school, she barely had time to sleep, let alone socialize. But tonight, she had nothing but time. She arrived early, claiming a corner booth and nursing a beer she couldn't really afford but needed emotionally. Slowly, others arrived. Samuel, still in his server's blacks. Lucia, eyes red from crying. Other servers from Belmont's and neighboring restaurants, word having spread through the invisible network that connected all service workers in the city. You did the right thing, Samuel said, raising his glass. Someone needed to stand up to that bastard. "The right thing doesn't pay rent," Maya replied, then immediately felt guilty for the bitterness in her voice. "No," Samuel agreed, "but it lets you sleep at night." They talked until the bar closed, sharing stories of difficult customers, of dreams deferred, of small victories and large defeats. It was cathartic and depressing in equal measure. These were good people, talented people, smart people, reduced to serving those who viewed them as props in their own narratives of success. Maya walked home alone, the city quiet around her. She climbed the 4 flights to her apartment. The elevator had been broken for 3 months, and found an envelope slipped under her door. Her heart sank, assuming it was an eviction notice or another bill she couldn't pay. But the envelope was expensive, the paper thick and cream-colored. Her name was written on the front in elegant script. Inside was a single piece of paper with a brief message. "Miss Richardson, your conduct at Belmont's has come to my attention. I believe we should discuss your future. Please present yourself at Blackwood Industries, executive floor, tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Ask for Mrs. Chen, V.B." Maya read it 3 times, her mind racing. Blackwood Industries, Harrison's company. This had to be a trap, a further humiliation. Maybe he wanted to threaten her in person, or worse, offer her some degrading position just to prove his power. But the initials, V.B., didn't match anyone she knew in Harrison's circle. She sat at her desk, the letter before her, and thought about her options. She could ignore it, continue her futile job search, watch her dreams crumble as her savings disappeared, or she could walk into what was obviously a trap and face whatever new humiliation Harrison had planned. Maya touched her grandmother's locket, thinking of the woman who'd carved out dignity from indignity, who'd built something from nothing. Her grandmother hadn't just cleaned offices. She'd studied the businesses she cleaned, learned their patterns, their weaknesses, their strengths. She saved every penny to buy a small cleaning service, then another, until she had a company that employed 50 people. She'd lost it all in a recession, started over at 60, and built it again. "Dignity is not given," Maya whispered to the empty room. "It is claimed."
Tomorrow, she would walk into Blackwood Industries with her head high. Whatever happened, she would face it standing. What she couldn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that the letter wasn't from Harrison at all. It was from someone who'd been watching, waiting, planning for months. Someone who'd finally found exactly what they were looking for in a waitress who'd refused to be invisible. The city hummed outside her window, indifferent to her struggles, her fears, her small acts of courage. But somewhere in a penthouse office, decisions were being made that would transform Maya Richardson from a footnote in Harrison Blackwood's story to the author of his downfall. The Blackwood Industries Tower pierced the Manhattan skyline like an accusation. 47 floors of glass and steel that reflected the morning sun in harsh, unforgiving angles. Maya stood at its base, her neck craned back to take in its full height, wearing her best suit, the one she'd bought second-hand and had tailored at a shop in Queens where the owner's daughter was in her statistics class. The fabric was good quality, the fit perfect, but she still felt like she was wearing a costume, playing a role she hadn't auditioned for. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate excess. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, supported by columns of black marble shot through with veins of gold. The floor was polished to such a high sheen that Maya could see her reflection walking beside her like a doubtful twin. Security guards in expensive suits stood at strategic points, their eyes tracking everyone who entered. Maya approached the main desk where a receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine sat behind a curved expanse of white stone. "Maya Richardson," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "I have a 9 a.m. appointment with Mrs. Chen." The receptionist's fingers flew across her keyboard, her expression revealing nothing. "Executive floor," she said, handing Maya a visitor's badge. "Elevator bank C. You'll need to insert this card to access the floor." The elevator was a capsule of silence and expensive cologne from the two executives who rode up with her, both pointedly ignoring her existence. Maya watched the numbers climb, 20, 30, 40, each floor representing a level of power and wealth she'd only seen from the outside, serving drinks and clearing plates. When the doors opened on the executive floor, she stepped into another world. If the lobby had been impressive, the executive floor was overwhelming. The receptionist here sat behind a desk that probably cost more than Maya's education. Original artwork lined the walls, actual Picassos and Pollocks, not prints. The air itself felt different, filtered and perfumed with something subtle and expensive. "Miss Richardson?" An older Chinese woman appeared, elegant in a way that transcended fashion. Her silver hair was pulled back in a chignon, her suit impeccable, her smile warm but assessing. "I'm Margaret Chen. Please follow me." They walked through corridors that felt more like a museum than an office, past conference rooms with walls of glass offering panoramic views of the city. Maya caught glimpses of meetings in progress, serious people making serious decisions about serious money. And then they turned a corner, and Maya's heart stopped. The nameplate on the door read, "Victoria Blackwood, Chairwoman and CEO." Blackwood, of course. Harrison's wife, or sister, or mother, Mrs. Chen said, as if reading Maya's thoughts. Harrison's mother, though I suspect he's forgotten that detail, along with many others. The door opened into an office that defied description. It wasn't just large, it was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows on two walls offering a view that made the city look like a child's train set. The furniture was understated, but exquisite, each piece chosen for both beauty and function. And behind the desk, in a chair that managed to be both throne-like and elegant, sat Victoria Blackwood. She was perhaps 70, but she wore her age like a designer accessory, something chosen rather than imposed. Her hair was white as winter snow, styled in a way that suggested she'd been beautiful when young and had transformed that beauty into something more formidable with age. Her eyes were Harrison's eyes, the same steel gray, but where his were cold, hers held a sharpness that suggested intelligence rather than cruelty. "Miss Richardson," she said, her voice carrying a slight British accent that Harrison definitely didn't share. "Please, sit. Would you like coffee? Tea? Something stronger? You look like you could use it." "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you," Maya managed. Mrs. Chen poured from a silver service that had probably been in the family for generations, and Maya was proud that her hands didn't shake as she accepted the delicate china cup. Victoria Blackwood studied her for a long moment, then smiled. A real smile, not the practiced things Maya was used to from wealthy customers. "You have no idea why you're here." "No, ma'am." "Good. Honesty. That's refreshingly rare in this building." Victoria stood and moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "Tell me, Miss Richardson, what do you know about hostile takeovers?" The question was so unexpected that Maya almost laughed. "From my corporate strategy course, they're when one company forcibly acquires another, usually by buying enough shares to gain control against the wishes of current management." Textbook definition. Now, what do you know about family businesses? Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. They're statistically more likely to fail by the third generation. The first generation builds, the second maintains, the third destroys. Victoria turned, her expression approving. "You've done your homework. And where would you place my son in that progression?" Maya hesitated. This felt like a trap, but a different kind than she'd expected. "I wouldn't presume to—" "Please do presume. I'm asking." "The third generation, ma'am. The destroyer. Victoria laughed, a sound like champagne bubbles breaking. Oh, I like you. You see, Miss Richardson, I built this company from nothing. Started with a single factory in Birmingham, making parts for automobiles. Expanded to America in the 70s, diversified in the 80s, went public in the 90s. I created an empire, and I foolishly thought my son would be a worthy heir. She returned to her desk, pulling out a folder that she slid across to Maya. I've been watching Harrison for the past 5 years, documenting every mistake, every cruelty, every decision that prioritized his ego over the company's welfare. The board has been patient because the stock price has remained stable, but that's despite him, not because of him. Our CFO, Jennifer Wu, you met last night, has been essentially running things while Harrison plays at being king. Maya opened the folder, her eyes widening at what she saw. Financial reports showing Harrison's pet projects hemorrhaging money, HR complaints that had been settled quietly with NDAs, a pattern of behavior that painted a picture of a man who viewed the company as his personal playground. Last night, Victoria continued, was the final straw. Not just his treatment of you, though that was appalling, but the fact that he did it in front of key executives, potential clients, people whose respect we need. He's become a liability, and it's time for him to go. I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? Everything, Victoria said. You see, I need someone to run this company. Someone with hunger, intelligence, and most importantly, someone who understands what it's like to build something from nothing. I've read your thesis, Miss Richardson. Your ideas about sustainable business practices, about treating workers as stakeholders rather than expenses, they're not just morally right, they're financially sound.
Maya, I'm sorry about last night. I should have said something, done something. We all should have, Victoria said curtly. But apologies are less useful than actions. Jennifer, bring Miss Richardson up to speed on our current financials. For the next 3 hours, Maya's head spun with numbers, projections, and problems. The company was profitable, but stagnant. Harrison's pet projects, a failed social media platform, an ill-conceived luxury brand expansion, a tech startup that burned through money without producing anything, had cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Meanwhile, the core business was being neglected, workers were demoralized, and competitors were gaining ground. The solutions are in your thesis, Jennifer said, pulling up Maya's work on her tablet. Profit sharing to increase productivity, sustainable supply chains to reduce long-term costs, investment in worker education to improve innovation. We've modeled it. Implementing your recommendations could increase profits by 30% within 2 years. This is still insane, Maya said, but she could feel something shifting inside her, a door opening to possibilities she'd never imagined. Is it? Victoria asked. More insane than letting Harrison continue to destroy what I built? More insane than the current system, where incompetent men fail upward while brilliant women serve them drinks? The afternoon became a blur of meetings. Legal came to discuss the takeover mechanics. PR strategized about the announcement. HR reviewed the termination package for Harrison, generous enough to avoid a lawsuit, not so generous as to reward failure. Through it all, Maya felt like she was watching from outside her body, seeing someone who looked like her making decisions, asking questions, commanding respect. At 4 o'clock, Harrison burst in. He looked different in his own territory, larger somehow, more dangerous. His eyes went from his mother to Jennifer to Maya, his expression cycling through confusion, anger, and finally, rage. "What is she doing here?" He pointed at Maya like she was something contaminating his space. "She's here at my invitation," Victoria said calmly. "Your invitation? Have you finally lost it? This is the incompetent waitress who ruined my dinner last night. Security should be escorting her out, not—" He stopped, noticing the papers on the desk, the legal documents with his name visible. "What is this?"
This is consequences. Harrison grabbed the papers, his face paling as he read. You're trying to remove me? I'm the CEO. You were the CEO, Victoria corrected. Past tense, as of tomorrow morning, when the board votes. The board will do exactly as I recommend. I've spoken to each member personally. They're unanimous. Harrison's face contorted, veins standing out on his forehead. Because of her? Because of this nobody? Because of you, Victoria said. Your arrogance, your cruelty, your complete inability to see beyond your own ego. Last night was just the latest in a long pattern of behavior that's become too costly to ignore. Harrison turned to Maya, his eyes wild. You planned this. You set me up. I didn't even know your mother existed until 3 hours ago, Maya said, surprised by how steady her voice was. This is illegal, Harrison shouted. I'll sue. I'll destroy you all.
With what money? Victoria asked. Your trust fund is contingent on board approval, which you've just lost. Your company credit cards will be canceled as of midnight. The corporate apartment reverts to the company. Even your car is leased through the business. You're about to learn what it's like to live without a safety net, son. Consider it education. Harrison looked between them, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Then his expression hardened into something ugly. You think you've won? You think putting this servant in charge changes anything? She doesn't know the first thing about running a company. She'll fail within a week, and you'll come begging me to return. Perhaps, Victoria said, but I doubt it. You see, Harrison, the difference between you and Ms. Richardson is that she spent her entire life learning how to do more with less, how to solve problems without throwing money at them, how to treat people with respect, even when they don't deserve it. These are skills you never developed because you never had to. Harrison grabbed a crystal paperweight from the desk and threw it against the wall, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. Everyone jumped except Victoria, who simply sighed. That was your grandfather's, she said quietly. He gave it to me when I made my first million. But you wouldn't know that because you've never asked about our history, about what it took to build what you've been so eager to destroy. Security arrived, they must have been waiting outside, and escorted Harrison out as he shouted threats and obscenities. The silence that followed his departure felt like the calm after a storm. Well, Victoria said, straightening papers on her desk as if nothing had happened. That went better than expected. He didn't try to hit anyone. Maya stared at the shattered crystal on the carpet, thinking about destruction and creation, about things breaking and things being built. What happens now? Now, Victoria said, we prepare for tomorrow's board meeting. Mrs. Chin will take you to get appropriate attire. No offense, but that suit won't do for your first board presentation. Jennifer will continue briefing you on financials. Our head of legal will review the corporate structure. You have approximately 18 hours to become at least conversationally fluent in running a multi-billion-dollar company. And if I fail? Then you fail, Victoria said simply. But you'll fail having tried something extraordinary, which is more than most people ever do. And somehow, I don't think you're going to fail. Maya thought about her grandmother, about dignity being claimed rather than given. I need to make a call, she said. Victoria nodded. Use my office. We'll be in the conference room when you're ready. When they left, Maya stood alone in the vast space, the city spread below her like a promise or a threat. She called her mother. Mom, it's me. I need to tell you something and I need you to sit down first. She told her everything, and her mother's response was exactly what she'd expected. Mija, are you sure this isn't some elaborate revenge plot? I'm not sure of anything, Maya admitted, but I'm going to try. Your grandmother would be so proud, her mother said, and she could hear the tears in her voice. We all are. After the call, Maya stood at the window where Victoria had stood, looking down at the city that had always seemed so impossibly big, so ruthlessly indifferent. From up here, it looked different, manageable, like something that could be changed, improved, made better. She thought about Harrison, probably at a bar somewhere raging about injustice while never recognizing the irony. She thought about Samuel and Lucia and all the others who'd been treated as less than human by people who mistook luck for merit. She thought about her father, injured and discarded by a system that valued profit over people.
Tomorrow, she would walk into a boardroom full of people who'd expect her to fail. They'd see her age, her background, her lack of pedigree, and they'd write her off before she spoke a word. But Maya had been underestimated her entire life. It was, perhaps, her greatest advantage. Mrs. Chen knocked and entered. "Ready for your transformation?" Maya touched her grandmother's locket one more time, then nodded. "Let's do this." They spent the rest of the day and most of the night preparing. Maya absorbed information like a sponge, her mind making connections between theory and practice, between what she'd learned in school and what she'd observed from the other side of the service counter. She tried on clothes that cost more than her monthly rent, practiced her presentation until her voice was hoarse, reviewed financial models until the numbers blurred together. At midnight, she finally left the building, a car service that Victoria had arranged taking her home. The driver helped her carry in the garment bags, the boxes of materials she needed to review, the laptop that was now hers. Her studio apartment had never felt smaller, but somehow it had never felt more like a launching pad. She sat at her small desk, surrounded by the detritus of two different lives, her old textbooks and her new responsibility, her grandmother's photo and tomorrow's board presentation. Outside, the city hummed its eternal song of ambition and struggle, of dreams deferred and occasionally impossibly achieved. Maya opened the laptop and began to write her notes for tomorrow's meeting. The first line came easily. "My name is Maya Richardson, and I understand what it's like to be invisible. But visibility, like dignity, is not given. It is claimed." The boardroom at Blackwood Industries was designed to intimidate. The table, a single piece of Brazilian rosewood, could seat 30, but today held only 12. Each board member had arrived early, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Maya stood outside the frosted glass doors, wearing a midnight blue suit that Mrs. Chen had selected, powerful but not aggressive, professional but not stuffy, and holding a leather portfolio that contained her entire future. Through the glass, she could see their shadows moving like sharks circling. These were people who could buy and sell companies before breakfast, who measured success in billions, who probably never served anyone anything except lawsuits. And in 5 minutes, she would walk in there and ask them to trust her with their empire. "Remember," Victoria said, beside her, "they're more afraid of you than you are of them." "I doubt that," Maya replied. "They should be. You represent change, and nothing terrifies the powerful more than change they didn't orchestrate." Victoria adjusted Maya's collar, a surprisingly maternal gesture. "Harrison just arrived. He's brought lawyers." Through the glass, Maya could see Harrison's distinctive silhouette gesticulating wildly. Even muted by the doors his voice carried, sharp, angry, demanding. "Let him rage. Rage is just fear wearing a loud suit." They entered together, and the room fell silent. Maya felt 12 pairs of eyes track her movement, evaluating, calculating, dismissing. She recognized some faces from business magazines and news articles: Robert Hutchinson, the banking mogul; Patricia Yamamoto, who'd built a tech empire from scratch; Gerald Foster, whose family had been in oil for 4 generations. These were titans, and she was, what, a fired waitress with an incomplete MBA? Harrison stood at the far end of the table, his lawyers flanking him like bodyguards. His face was mottled red, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He said, This is a farce. You can't be seriously considering this insanity. Sit down, Harrison, Victoria said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Maya sat to her right, Jennifer Wu to her left. I will not sit down. He slammed his hands on the table. This is my company. No, it's not. It never was. You were a caretaker, and you failed in that role.
Robert Hutchinson cleared his throat. Victoria, while I understand your concerns about Harrison's performance, this solution seems extreme. Miss Richardson has no corporate experience, no relevant background. She has something more valuable, Victoria interrupted. She has perspective. Jennifer, please share the analysis. Jennifer opened her laptop, and the wall screen came to life with charts and graphs. In the 18 months since Harrison became CEO, our stock has grown by 3%. The industry average is 12%. We've lost 4 major contracts, had 6 discrimination lawsuits, and our employee turnover is 40% above industry standard. Markets fluctuate. These are temporary setbacks. Temporary? Jennifer pulled up another slide. This is the 5th consecutive quarter of declining performance. Meanwhile, our competitors have gained significant market share. AMC Corp, which was half our size 5 years ago, is now valued higher than us. Patricia Yamamoto leaned forward. These numbers are concerning, but they don't explain why we should hand the company to someone with no experience. This was Maya's cue. She stood, her legs surprisingly steady. May I? The room turned to her, and she felt the weight of their skepticism like a physical force. But she'd faced worse. She'd faced Harrison's contempt, poverty's grinding pressure, the dismissal of people who thought they knew her story before she opened her mouth. You're right, Maya began, her voice clear and strong. I don't have corporate experience. I have something else. I have experience with the 99% of the world that companies like this one depend on but never see. I've spent the last 18 months serving people in this room, watching you make decisions, listening to you discuss strategies. You talk about market penetration and consumer behavior like they're abstract concepts, but I know the consumers. I am the consumer. She clicked to her first slide, a photo of Belmont's kitchen staff. These 12 people generate over $2 million in revenue annually for Belmont's, and collectively, they make less than what this company spends on executive coffee services. They're invisible to you, but they're the foundation everything else is built on. This is ridiculous, Harrison interjected. She's giving us a sociology lecture? She ignored him, clicking to the next slide, her thesis findings. Blackwood Industries employs 47,000 people globally. If we implemented a profit-sharing program that distributed just 5% of annual profits among non-executive employees, productivity models show we would see a return of 12% within the first year. Why? Because people work harder when they have a stake in the outcome. That's theoretical, Gerald Foster said dismissively. No, it's not. Maya pulled up another slide. 3 of our competitors have implemented similar programs. Their productivity is up 18%, turnover is down 30%, and their stock prices have outperformed ours by a factor of 3. She continued, methodically dismantling objections, presenting solutions, showing how her lack of experience was actually an advantage. She talked about sustainable supply chains that would reduce costs, about employee education programs that would drive innovation, about the untapped markets that existed in communities the company had ignored. You want to give away profits. You want to coddle employees. You want to turn this company into a charity. Maya turned to face him directly. No, I want to turn this company into what it claims to be, a leader. Right now, we're following.
We're using business models from the 1980s in 2025. We're hemorrhaging talent to startups that offer equity and purpose along with paychecks. We're losing customers to companies that align with their values. This isn't charity, it's evolution. Patricia Yamamoto raised her hand. Miss Richardson, this is all very impressive, but the fact remains that you don't even have your degree.
She will have it within 3 months, Victoria said. The university has agreed to an accelerated schedule. In the meantime, she'll have the full support of the executive team. The executive team I built, Harrison said, they're loyal to me. Are they? Victoria nodded to Mrs. Chen, who opened the boardroom doors. In walked the entire executive leadership team, the CFO, CTO, heads of departments Maya had only seen in organizational charts. But what made Maya's breath catch was who walked in with them. Samuel, Lucia, and 5 other servers from Belmont's, all looking uncomfortable but determined in their borrowed business clothes. "What is this?" Harrison demanded. Marcus Chen, the CTO, spoke first. "We're here to support Miss Richardson's appointment. Harrison, your treatment of service staff at Belmont's wasn't an isolated incident. You created a culture of fear and contempt that's poisoned this entire organization." Sarah Martinez, the head of HR, added, "In the past year, we've had 43 formal complaints about your behavior, Harrison. I've brought them to you repeatedly, and you've ignored them all." "Those were disgruntled employees," Harrison said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "No." Samuel stepped forward, his aged hand steady despite the room full of power. "We're not disgruntled. We're human beings who deserve basic respect. I've served you dozens of times, Mr. Blackwood. I've watched you humiliate staff, throw things, refuse to pay bills. But more than that, I've watched Miss Richardson handle every situation with grace, intelligence, and strength. If you want someone who understands how to lead through respect rather than fear, she's standing right there." Lucia spoke next, her voice shaking but determined. "Miss Richardson tutored me in accounting when she found out I was taking night classes. She did it for free on her own time because she wanted to help. That's leadership, helping people become better versions of themselves." One by one, the other servers spoke, telling stories of Maya's kindness, her problem-solving abilities, her natural leadership. It was orchestrated. Victoria had clearly planned this, but it was also genuine. These were real stories, real experiences, real testimony to who Maya was when no one important was watching. Harrison's face had gone from red to white. "This is a coup. This is... Mother, how could you?" "How could I not?" Victoria replied. "You had every advantage, every opportunity, every second chance. And what have you done with them? You've become a small man in a big office, confusing fear for respect, confusing inheritance for achievement." Robert Hutchinson had been silent, but now he spoke. "I'd like to hear more about these discrimination lawsuits." Jennifer pulled up the files. 6 current cases, all settled quietly with NDAs. Total cost to the company, $14 million. And that's just the financial cost. The reputational damage if these became public would be catastrophic. "They can't become public," Harrison said quickly. "The NDAs are avoidable if the company chooses to void them, which, under new leadership, we might consider doing as part of a transparency initiative." The threat hung in the air. Harrison looked around the room, searching for allies, finding none. Patricia Yamamoto stood. "I move to call the vote. All in favor of removing Harrison Blackwood as CEO." One by one, hands rose. Even Robert Hutchinson, who'd been skeptical, raised his hand. The vote was unanimous. "All in favor of appointing Maya Richardson as interim CEO pending completion of her degree." Again, unanimous, although some hands rose more slowly than others. Harrison stood so violently his chair toppled backward. "You'll regret this, all of you. When she fails, and she will fail, When the stock tanks and the company collapses, remember that you chose her over me, a waitress, a nobody.
A human being, Maya said quietly, and somehow her soft voice cut through his shouting. Which is all anyone is, Mr. Blackwood. The only difference is what we do with our humanity. Harrison stormed out, his lawyers scrambling to follow. The room sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone. Then Patricia Yamamoto laughed, a short, surprised sound. Well, Ms. Richardson, you've just become the most unlikely CEO in Fortune 500 history. The media is going to have a field day. Let them, Victoria said. The story writes itself. Local woman rises from service industry to corporate leadership. It's the American dream updated for modern times. It's a disaster waiting to happen, Robert Hutchinson said, though not unkindly. Ms. Richardson, I voted for you because Harrison had to go, but I have serious doubts about your ability to lead this company. Good, Maya replied, which clearly wasn't the response he had expected. Doubt keeps people sharp. I have doubts too, Mr. Hutchinson, but doubt paired with determination is just another word for motivation. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, discussing transition plans, press strategies, immediate priorities. Maya absorbed it all, her mind racing but her exterior calm. She assigned tasks, asked pointed questions, and began to reshape the company's priorities in real time. When it finally ended, the boardroom emptied except for Maya, Victoria, and Jennifer. Maya sank into a chair, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. How do you feel? Victoria asked. Like I just jumped off a cliff and discovered I might have wings. You do, Jennifer said. I've run the numbers on your proposals. They're not just good, they're revolutionary. If we can implement even half of what you're suggesting, we'll transform not just this company, but potentially the entire industry. Victoria stood, gathering her things. There's one more thing, Maya. Harrison won't go quietly. He'll try to sabotage you, to prove you're unfit. He has media connections, political friends, people who owe him favors. The next few months will be brutal. I've been dealing with brutal my entire life. At least now I'll be fairly compensated for it. That night, Maya didn't go home. She stayed in the office, her office now, though she couldn't quite believe it. Reading through reports, revealing contracts, learning the intricate details of the empire she had just inherited. At 3 a.m., she called her mother. I did it, Mom! I actually did it! I know, Mija. It's all over the news. Waitress becomes CEO. They're calling it the story of the year. Maya looked out at the city lights, thinking about all the people out there working night shifts, cleaning offices, serving food, driving trucks, the invisible army that kept everything running. It's not just my story, Mom. It's all of ours. As dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Maya Richardson sat at her desk. Her grandfather's desk, Victoria had told her, brought over from England piece by piece, and began drafting her first company-wide memo. To the Blackwood Industries family. My name is Maya Richardson, and like many of you, I know what it's like to be overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated. That changes today. Today, we begin building a company where every contribution matters, where every voice is heard, where dignity isn't reserved for corner offices. Today, we stop being a company that employs people and start being a company that empowers them. She thought of Harrison, probably in his penthouse apartment, raging against the injustice of it all, never understanding that justice was exactly what had been served. She thought of Samuel and Lucia and all the others who'd stood up for her, risking their own jobs to speak truth to power. But most of all, she thought of her grandmother, who'd built and lost and built again, who taught her that dignity wasn't given, but claimed. Today, Maya had claimed not just dignity, but power, and she intended to use it to ensure that others could claim theirs, too.
6 months later, Maya stood before the same crystal chandelier at Belmont's, but this time as a customer. She'd brought her entire executive team here for working dinner, deliberately choosing Samuel's section. The restaurant had changed too. Better wages, profit sharing, respect flowing both directions. Harrison had tried everything to sabotage her success, planted news stories questioning her qualifications, filed lawsuits claiming mental incompetence in her mother, spread rumors about improper relationships. But each attack only strengthened Maya's resolve and her support. The company's stock had risen 40%. Employee satisfaction scores hit record highs. They'd just landed the largest contract in company history. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Samuel said, pouring wine with hands that no longer shook from exhaustion, but from age gracefully earned. Maya touched her locket, thinking of all the invisible people who'd claimed their dignity throughout history, building the foundations others stood upon. She'd completed her MBA with honors while transforming Blackwood Industries into a model for ethical capitalism. Harrison had been wrong about one thing. She hadn't become his boss. She'd become something more powerful. Proof that the American dream could still exist when courage met opportunity, when dignity refused to remain silent, when someone finally said enough and meant it. Subscribe to the Service Saga, where silence is never forgotten.